Hey, what up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you. For years and years, we've heard Ric Flair talk about being the life and blood of WCW, and for years we've seen Ric Flair, throw punches at Vince Russo anytime that there's a chance. Basically, pointing out all of the stupid things that Russo did when he came on board from WWE. Vince Russo at one point was looked at as being one of the brightest minds in the business, the guy that takes full credit for building up The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin, Generation X, and basically almost everything that went along with the Attitude Era. A lot of people have said that Vince Russo was just the guy at the right place at the right time. Him and Ed Ferraro were basically part of the writing committee for WWE. They would write scripts, they would bounce things off of Vince McMahon, but a lot of people still give credit to Vince McMahon as being the guy that was paying those guys, that sort of took their ideas, molded them to into his own, threw away the trash, and kept the good stuff. He basically was the editor that put together his television show. But basically, WCW was coming to an impasse where, they had been getting their butts kicked for a while now by WWE. They felt that Eric Bischoff had lost control of WCW, and basically, AOL Time Warner was stepping in and sending Eric Bischoff home, telling him he was going to take an extended vacation. I think the plan at that time was basically for Bischoff to go home, live out his contract, and never return to WCW. And Vince Russo was going to step in and be the new guiding light that was going to build WCW back up to where they were with this sort of crash course sex and violence sort of television. Vince Russo, when he came to WCW, I think they found out pretty fast that the Vince Russo ideas were not going to fly. Basically, with every minute of every show, bouncing off and going into a new, different, crazy direction. Definitely, when there was WWE and WCW going at the same time, Nitro and Monday Night Raw, it was definitely one of the most funnest times in wrestling for wrestling fans. There was there wasn't really DVRs, so if you wanted to watch both shows, you either had to sit in front of your television with your remote in your hand and bounce the television back and forth using the button, flipping from USA and TNT, checking out, what's on, or you basically have to sit and watch one show, record another, and as soon as the shows are done, you press stop, rewind on the tape, and watch the other show from what you were recording, which was made it so fun if you're a wrestling fan. When you went to school or if you went to work, you would go and you would tell, your friends, did you see this? And every once in a while, your friend might have been stuck on the other television. Maybe he forgot to change the channel, or maybe he liked what was going on and missed something that was really big on Raw or Nitro, and you were able to bounce it back and forth this time. But basically, a lot of people, even WWE with the Monday Night War series, has blamed a lot of the problems with WCW on Vince Russo. And Ric Flair actually stepped up, and he sort of, stuck up for Vince Russo, I guess you can say. He said that basically when Vince Russo came to WCW and he came on board, he was just trying to survive like everybody else. He did Ric Flair says that he did the same things that Russo did. Basically Vince Russo had a family, and at the end of the day, everybody was just trying to survive. By the time that Vince Russo arrived into WCW, it was already gone. Ric Flair says there were thousands of Indians and no chiefs, and if there were chiefs, they didn't get along. Everybody was in it for their own thing and their own money, which they're entitled to do. Basically, this is one of the smartest things I've ever seen Ric Flair say. A lot of times, Ric's out there in bizarro crazy land sometimes, but seems like one time when he sat down with WrestleTalk TV, which is on YouTube. They put a very good show out there. I subscribe to the channel. They put up lots and lots of interviews with lots of famous wrestlers. And, if you are not subscribed, you're definitely really missing out. But I think of, Vince Russo when he went to WCW as like basically a team that went out and spent a lot of money. Eric Bischoff, one of the smartest things that he ever did was basically just signing up all of the talent He had an unlimited checkbook, with that being Ted Turner's money. And, he went out, he got Savage, he got Hogan, he already had Flair, he already had Luger. So, he had under, his roof, four of the biggest names that were involved in the wrestling business. Under his roof, of course, on the other side, WWF, who had sort of lost a lot of traction with Monday Night Raw. They still had a lot of, talent there that, over time would get over with their character. There was a lot of times when basically WCW had lost the ball with the NWO. They really ran that angle really way too far into the ground. They basically made the heels, the ultra cool baby faces at the same time, making their own company look very weak. I think it's all right for a company to sort of run an invasion storyline and get beat down, for maybe a month, maybe 2 months, and then all of a sudden they rise up with some sort of a match like a War Games. And that's when WCW puts their flag in the ground and says, you know what, this is us, this is our show, we're going to win. But instead, they sort of looked that they had signed Hall, they had signed Nash, the NWO shirts were selling like wildfire, and they just kept building NWO bigger and bigger and bigger. And they just had to stick with it, to the point where basically the NWO guys were all, their heads got way too big, that they weren't going to do this, they weren't going to do that. They felt like the show wouldn't go on if they weren't there, so they could pull any kind of a stunt that they wanted to do. But I've been trying to think all day of like a GM that's got a job in sports that is really, taking on more than he can chew, and he has to try and fix the situation. The one team that I can think of was the Anaheim Angels. This season, we saw, basically Josh Hamilton wasn't living up to his contract, and the Angels ended up trading Hamilton back to the Rangers. Also, a few years ago, the Angels went out and they signed Albert Pujols to some, mega, deal. I can't remember how many years and how many millions of dollars, but it was way too much money over way too many years. Basically, the Angels thought that bringing in Albert Pujols would, sort of push them into success. Of them winning titles right away, but with an extended title, extended contract of like 8 or it might have been 8 years, it might have been 10 years, but however many years, Albert Pujols is not going to be producing to the numbers that he's getting paid for at the later end of his career. He's going to be living off the legacy of before, still making that money, but it was the only way the Angels could secure bringing Pujols in, because they guaranteed his future, instead of sort of giving him a short-term deal to get in. And baseball is a lot like wrestling, and these contracts are guaranteed. Basically if they show up to work, if they don't show up to work, they still make the same amount of money. It doesn't matter if they win, lose, or draw. WCW's got to pony up the cash that's on there. And, Russo took on this ship that already felt like it was like the Titanic. It was already halfway into the water. You had Hall, you had Nash, you had Hogan, you had Savage. You had all of these groups at that time, whether it was the NWO, the NWO Wolfpack, the Four Horsemen, the LWO. Basically everybody was trying to climb their way up the ladder, but there was no room at the top of the ladder because they had so many main eventers at that time. But there was no way to get these guys to quit. There was no way to get these guys off the contracts. And WCW just kept on ponying up money after money after money. They had one big year where they posted a profit, and then after that it just was downhill because they spent that profit as fast as they could make it. And I applaud Flair for sticking up for Russo. Russo's had a lot of great ideas. He has a great wrestling mind. I think he would do really good on a wrestling committee, or having somebody like Vince McMahon sort of take his ideas and filter out, and the good from the bad and things like that. But as being the number one booker, as the guy that was running everything in a wrestling company, too many times we've seen that this does not work. WCW, TNA, why TNA keeps going back to this guy, and they're probably going to go back to him sooner than later. Vince Russo was trying to talk himself into getting a Lucha Underground deal, trying to get on with that company. But we'll have to see. I think lucky enough for us and the people that watch Lucha Underground, They didn't fall for his tricks, and they didn't bring him in, but they did have him at a show. So there was a little bit of a story there. So we'll have to see. But Ric Flair saying that it wasn't all Russo's fault, is an applaud for Ric Flair, and I believe it is the truth.